What if I told you that the biggest advantage rich families have isn't money, and it isn't luck? It's a set of invisible rules that quietly shape every financial decision they make. Rules that are almost never explained outside their homes. While most people spend their lives chasing bigger paychecks, wealthy families are teaching their children a completely different game. That's why one generation builds lasting wealth while another starts from zero again and again. The shocking part is that these rules aren't secret because they're hidden. They're secret because most people never think to look for them. And once you discover them, you'll realize that the gap between being rich and staying rich has almost nothing to do with how much money you earn. Imagine two boys growing up in the same city. Daniel and Ethan were born only a few miles apart. They attended similar schools, dreamed about successful careers, and believed hard work was the key to a better life. From the outside, their childhoods looked almost identical. But inside their homes, something invisible was shaping their future every single day. One family was passing down habits that quietly created wealth for generations. The other was passing down beliefs that unknowingly kept every generation starting over. Neither boy understood it at the time. But years later, one conversation would reveal the difference that changed everything. Daniel grew up believing that success had only one formula. Work harder than everyone else. His father repeated the same advice throughout his childhood. The harder you work, the richer you'll become. Daniel never questioned it. Why would he? His father was honest, disciplined, and willing to sacrifice everything for his family. To Daniel, that looked like the perfect example of success. Across town, Ethan's family spoke about money very differently. At the dinner table, they rarely asked how much someone earned. Instead, they asked something far more important. What does this decision buy us 5 years from now? As a child, Ethan didn't understand the question. But he heard it almost every day. Without realizing it, he was learning to think beyond today. Daniel was learning to survive the present. Ethan was learning to build the future. That invisible difference seemed meaningless at first. Until they both graduated. Both found stable jobs. Both earned nearly the same salary. Both believed adulthood had finally begun. For the first few months, their lives looked almost identical. Then their first paychecks arrived. Daniel celebrated by rewarding himself. A newer phone. Better clothes. Weekend trips. He told himself he deserved it after working so hard. Ethan celebrated too. But before spending anything, he moved part of every paycheck into investments and long-term assets. His lifestyle stayed almost the same. His future didn't. Months turned into years. Daniel's income kept growing. So did his expenses. Every raise felt exciting. But somehow, every raise disappeared just as fast. Ethan's income also increased. Yet instead of upgrading his lifestyle, he upgraded what he owned. Little by little, his investments began producing income of their own. Daniel never noticed the difference. Because from the outside, Ethan didn't look richer. He still drove a simple car. He still wore ordinary clothes. He didn't feel the need to impress anyone. One evening, Daniel laughed when he saw Ethan leaving work. "You've been promoted twice," Daniel said. "So why do you still live like this?" Ethan smiled. "I'd rather my money think I'm poor than my future think I'm careless." Daniel laughed again. He thought Ethan was missing out on life. What Daniel didn't realize was that he had just heard the first invisible rule rich families quietly pass from one generation to the next. They teach their children to buy ownership before appearance. Most people are taught to look successful. Wealthy families teach their children to become successful first. The difference sounds small. But over 20 years, it changes everything. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's words. "I'd rather my money think I'm poor than my future think I'm careless." At first, he dismissed it as another clever quote. But over the next few years, something became impossible to ignore. Every time they met, Ethan seemed calmer. Not happier because he owned more. Calmer because he needed less. Daniel, on the other hand, was earning the highest salary of his life. Yet he felt more pressure than ever. A larger apartment meant a larger mortgage. A nicer car meant higher payments. Every new upgrade demanded another upgrade. Without realizing it, he had become responsible for a lifestyle that required him to keep running. One unexpected expense could throw everything off balance. Then one afternoon, both men received the same shocking news. Their company was cutting hundreds of jobs. For the first time in years, Daniel felt genuine fear. His first thought wasn't about finding another opportunity. It was about his bills. His mortgage. His car payment. His credit cards. Everything depended on the next paycheck. Ethan reacted differently. He wasn't excited. But he wasn't panicked either. Years earlier, his parents had taught him another invisible rule. Freedom is built before it's needed. Emergency savings weren't just money. They were time. Investments weren't just profits. They were options. Financial security wasn't about predicting the future. It was about preparing for a future you couldn't predict. Daniel suddenly understood something that had never crossed his mind. He had spent years increasing his income. Ethan had spent years increasing his choices. Those are not the same thing. A few weeks later, Daniel found another job. The crisis passed. But the fear stayed with him. One evening, he invited Ethan over for dinner. After a long silence, Daniel finally asked the question that had been bothering him for years. What did your parents teach you that mine never did? Ethan leaned back and smiled. They never taught me to chase money. Daniel frowned. Then what did they teach you? They taught me to protect freedom. Daniel looked confused. Ethan continued. They believed money was only valuable if it created more choices tomorrow than it did today. Every dollar had a job. If it couldn't create future freedom, they questioned why they were spending it. Daniel sat quietly. For the first time, he realized that wealth wasn't built by a few big decisions. It was built by thousands of invisible ones. Around this point, if you're enjoying this story and want more insights into the psychology behind lasting wealth, make sure to subscribe to Dark Capital. Every story on this channel is designed to help you see money differently before the world teaches you the hard way. That night, Daniel went home. He didn't open a finance book. He didn't search for a new investment. Instead, he opened his banking app. For the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at how much money he had. He was looking at what every dollar was silently teaching him about himself. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. He kept staring at the numbers on his screen. For years, he had believed those numbers measured his success. Now they felt like a mirror reflecting every financial decision he had ever made. The next morning, he didn't promise to become rich. He made a much smaller promise. He would stop making decisions just to impress people who weren't paying his bills. That single decision changed everything. Over the next few months, Daniel sold things he didn't truly need. He paid off expensive debt. He built an emergency fund. For the first time, part of his income stayed with him instead of disappearing every month. The changes felt slow. Sometimes they even felt invisible. But Daniel finally understood something his father had never been taught. Wealth rarely changes your life overnight. It changes your habits first. And your habits eventually change your life. Years passed. One afternoon, Daniel met Ethan for coffee. The conversation felt strangely familiar. Only this time, Daniel wasn't asking questions. He was sharing answers. I finally understand what your parents gave you, Daniel said. Ethan smiled. It was never money, was it? Daniel shook his head. No. It was a way of thinking. Ethan nodded. Money comes and goes. But the way you think decides whether it comes back. Daniel looked around the cafe. People were rushing to meetings. Checking expensive watches. Talking about promotions. Chasing bigger paychecks. He realized he had spent years doing exactly the same thing. No one had ever told him there was another game being played. A game where patience was more valuable than speed. Where ownership mattered more than appearance. Where freedom was worth more than status. That was the final invisible rule. Rich families don't simply pass down money. They pass down thinking. Money can disappear in a single generation. A powerful mindset can create wealth for many generations. The greatest inheritance isn't a fortune. It's a philosophy. Because when children grow up watching smart financial decisions instead of hearing empty financial advice, they begin building wealth long before they earn their first paycheck. Most people spend their lives asking, how can I make more money? Rich families quietly ask, how can this decision make the next generation stronger? That one question changes everything. Maybe that's why real wealth is so difficult to copy. People notice the lifestyle. They admire the houses. They envy the cars. But they almost never see the invisible rules that built them. And those invisible rules are the real inheritance. If this story changed the way you think about money, subscribe to Dark Capital for more stories that uncover the psychology, habits, and decisions behind lasting wealth. Remember this, the richest inheritance is never money, it's the mindset that knows how to create it again.